So here we are. I'm just missing one student, I think, right now. So, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming back. Today we have a special guest, Kathy Wood, a student in this class from a year ago. Her presentation on injustice in the LGBT community, of cases of violence, kind of things we've been reading about, some cases, and she'll elaborate some and give us some really vivid description and imagery of some other instances as well.
Like you said, I'm Kathy Wood. I'm just another student here. I took this class last fall with Dr. Swarovski, and I needed a diversity class for my degree. And I thought, LGBT history, I got this. Little did I know that I would actually learn something in that class. And that's one of the things I learned about was the upstairs lounge. I had never heard of it, and that's what most of this presentation is about. But unfortunately, it started with the Stonewall riots, July 27, 1968. On that night, police raided it. Wrong button. Let's try that again. At 1:30 in the morning. They had a tendency to raid all the bars in New York and across the U.S. to round up what they called the degenerates, the undesirables of society. This night, the patrons refused to disperse, and what they ended up doing, what ended up starting the riot was when one of the cops had handcuffed one of the lesbian patrons and hit her on the head with a billy club. This in turn turned into the 3 days of the Stonewall riots. The crowd grew over 600 within 15 minutes. And this is some of the images from that night. And they were throwing everything from cans to bricks to trash cans. Anything they could get their hands on, they were throwing at the police. They had to actually call in riot police. Riot police showed up, and because the crowd was so immense, they actually retreated into the Stonewall and barricaded themselves in until more backup arrived. The upstairs lounge was in New Orleans, Louisiana. It was located upstairs of another bar that was downstairs called the Gemini. It was Pride weekend. It was actually the 4th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in 1973. The patrons had been celebrating Pride and had gone to this bar. This bar was at the time a temporary church for the MCC Church, the Metropolitan Community Church, which started out of Los Angeles. They had just opened this chapter in Louisiana, and they did not have an actual permanent location at the time, so the upstairs lounge had offered to allow them to use their building for services during the morning on Sundays. On this Sunday, after services, they had put on a beer and buffet for those that remained. There was about 125 people, and as usual, when the beer started running out, so did the people. At approximately 7 o'clock, 7:30 that evening, the buzzer downstairs rang. There was because gay bars at the time were not acceptable, they had to hide where their locations were, and they had a buzzer downstairs to let people know that there was somebody coming up, because at the top of the stairs there was a speakeasy door, which was a heavy steel door that had a little window in it so that people could look out and see who it was before they opened it. At 7:30 the buzzer rang, and the bartender, Buddy Russman, asked one of his patrons to check the door. When he opened the door, flames shot into the bar, and this is what the inside looked like. 29 people died that night. 32 ended up dying in total. Buddy Russman managed to get 32 people out the back, because at the time fire marshals and fire laws did not indicate that you had to mark fire exits and so forth. There was also steel bars on the windows with a 14-inch gap. Many patrons tried to escape through these gaps. A lot of them didn't make it. Two of the patrons that made it out, Marty was a piano player and one of the other bartenders had gone back in after they'd made it out. The second bartender had gone back to get his lover. The piano player had gone back to get other patrons to lead them out now that he knew the way. He was found huddled with two other patrons under the piano, and the second bartender was found huddled by the exit with his lover. This is what the staircase looked like going up into the bar, and that is the actual speakeasy door that was outside of it. This was the largest mass murder of LGBT community in U.S. history to date. It still holds today. This fire that killed so many members of the LGBT community was a greater loss of life than the 1788 fire that destroyed the French Quarter. This is Buddy Russman. This was him dressed up for a Halloween party that they'd had at the upstairs lounge, and this was him as he normally would look. It was Assistant Pastor Mitch that had went back for his lover, Lewis. This is what they did to Reverend Bill Lawson. He had tried to escape out the windows because he got stuck. As an example, they left him hanging out the window the entire evening and into the next day to show what happens to people that hang out in places like this. The fire exposed a very ugly streak of homophobia and bigotry within the city of New Orleans. The city had to finally address that they did have a gay community, though they did not want to make a big deal of it. All reports of this incident was out of the paper within 2 days. Roger Nunes was the prime suspect. He'd been arrested. And 4 days prior to this, he had been treated at a psychiatric facility for conversion hysteria. It's a neurological and a psychological issue that has no known symptoms. They can transfer their psychological issues into physical symptoms. Though he was suspected of doing this because he had been in the bar prior to this and had been kicked out for an unknown reason. And they believe that he came back and doused the staircase with lighter fluid, and that's what caused the fire. Nobody was ever arrested. He died 1 year later from a brain tumor. They think that that may have been part of the issue he had with his conversion. The stories in the newspapers dehumanized the scene. Things like bodies were stacked up like pancakes. The workers stood knee-deep in bodies. The heat had been so intense, many were cooked together. The public was no better. There was many quotes published in the paper in the short time that this was a headline. A cab driver said that he hoped it burned their dresses off. A female citizen said, "I think the Lord had something to do with this." And the last worst insulting one was a radio talk show host said, "Do you know what they're going to bury the ashes of the queers in? Fruit jars." And this was broadcasted on radio. Even the mayor said that, you know, that the thieves hang out there and they use